So, I mean, he may debate this, and there might be other people who do, but I'm just going to introduce him as Seth Russell, the greatest Baylor quarterback of all time, joins us now on 365 Sports. And I won't let you bring up the fact that there's a statue of another guy and all that other stuff. You know, there are other things to greatness than just statues, Seth. But love having you on the show. Love talking to you whenever we get a chance. Thanks for making time for us today, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I appreciate y'all having me on. I know y'all been killing it lately, and I know everybody's got a lot of questions about what this upcoming season is going to look like, and I think we'll have hopefully give a pretty good glimpse into what that all looks like.
Seth, I know that you weren't at the spring game, but you have since watched it, and it's hard for most people to kind of glean what any of that means, especially when they were doing kind of the modified Stableford scoring version of what was going on, their offense versus defense. But what did you see from Blake Shapen and Sawyer Robertson and even Nick Martinez? What is it? I said that wrong.
RJ Martinez.
I'm sorry. I've been watching too much baseball. RJ Martinez, as these are the top three guys as they head into the season.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good opportunity there for these guys, with Blake coming in, obviously with a lot of experience. RJ coming in with a lot of experience, right? And Sawyer, I think he's got the build for it. Now I think he needs, maybe just for this system, probably have to put on another, maybe 10, 15 pounds just to max that 6'4" frame out. But from looking at it from a 50,000 foot view, not sitting in the meetings, not looking through the film, not figuring out what the play calls are. I mean, I think they were consistent. Right. I don't think it was anything less or anything more than what I was expecting on that standpoint. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? I think it's a good thing, right? Just from a former player. I think a lot of the guys around them have also developed, right? The big question on my end was, hey, who's going to step up on the receiving core, right? I think they all did a great job. The tight end is going to be big. But for the most part, I don't know if I could technically declare a starter based off what I saw in the spring game, because they both did well, right? They both had the ups, they both had the downs. And then, I trust Coach Bell and Grimes and Aranda that they're going to pick the first, the best person to start out, of who they believe is going to be the starter. And then, hey, just let them, it's going to be their place to lose.
Seth, there was some thoughts. Dave Aranda in that spring game presser had mentioned that they would have liked to have made a decision like the week after. Well, that was like 5 weeks ago. So clearly they're probably not going to announce anything. Do you think that's better for the group as a whole, not having necessarily a de facto starter, or do you think it would have made some sense to say, okay, Blake Shapen's the guy or Sawyer Robertson's the guy?
It's kind of a double-edged sword. Right, and Coach Aranda knows his team better than any of us do. I'm sure he's probably had, any coach I think would have a sit down with each of the position groups or each of the individual players and just, hey, get their thoughts, right? Because, but ultimately it's going to be his decision. But I would have liked to have seen a decision made, right? Because you had summer workouts, you had spring ball. Right, you had the camp, and if you get some buy-in, right, you say, hey, you know what? Let's say Blake is the starter going into the season, but hey, that's not to say that maybe he loses it in fall camp, right? And so, but then again, that leaves the door open, opportunity. You don't want to create doubt within the team, and so if the coaches are like, man, Shapen was our guy last year. I don't know if he is this year. Well, that can create some doubt, which you don't want, right? You want full support, whoever it is. But then again, not to go back, it's like I said, it's a double-edged sword, so I kind of play both sides here. Hey, now summer workouts are going to be critical, right? Who's going to show up? Who's going to be that outspoken leader? Who's going to be that guy that the players rally behind? And I think that is going to be the determining factor on who is going to be the starter, leading into the next season.
Seth, last year, I mean, some of it was obviously that didn't have maybe some of the right guys in the right spots, but they had chemistry issues, and they just never really gelled together and all that. I how much more important is that than maybe just the who's going to play left tackle and who's going to do this, is getting this team to come together in a way where they function better than they did last year, because it was just so choppy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's going to determine the season, right? I mean, if you look back at some of the games, those games are won or lost by 3 or less plays, if you really break it down. And so, hey, if one of those 3 plays where they were on the same page, maybe it's a different turnout, with the season. But had a young receiving core, that was really tough. We had a new starter at quarterback. We had a really experienced line. But in my opinion, I think the offensive line last year maybe felt like they took on too much pressure, right? Just from a standpoint of, hey, we're number 1, number 2 offensive line coming back. We need to produce. We have to do this. And then maybe some of the guys just didn't live up to the hype, right? And then with this offense, that is where it is established. I mean, it's a line of scrimmage. It's getting those guys in the north and south. It's not a horizontally developed offense, and so it's really figuring out how can all these guys just take that next step, right? Figure out, hey, determine what's your weak point and attack that, right? And grow great at it, but then also figure out, hey, who are those going to be those guys that stepped up? Because I didn't really see anyone last year that was just like, hey, give me the ball besides Reese, right? Give me the ball. Get the ball in my hands. We didn't see that leader step up last year. And I'd say at least 5 players on offense need to step up this year to be a successful season.
Blake had the just whirlwind finish 2 years ago. Him and Gary both dealing with injuries, magical run, greatest season on paper ever. And with that's going to come some very lofty expectations, Seth. But then again, there's also coaches who now have, him on tape and can start to break him down and look at him differently. And there's a different type of pressure with that. We heard, one of his great, strengths this offseason was improving as a leader and, focusing, it appears a bit more on that than even the on-the-field side of it. But knowing kind of what all was brewing in the pot for him last year and being the full-time starter for the first time, what did you observe? What did you notice as far as negatives or positives, and how do you think that plays into having that experience moving into this following season?
Yeah, watching Blake last year, I mean, I think he did he did well with what he was handed, right? Coming into a season with really unknown expectations on himself, right? I know he finished out the season strong. I mean, look at the second half against Ole Miss, right? We didn't have an offense that second half. And so really, if he would break that down going into last season, he's able to, really be a strong factor. But, all of that, it's a new season, new team. I mean, new strengths, new weaknesses. And so, yeah, you say, hey, I have experience on the field. I have experience with the offense. But really, it's do you have camaraderie with your team, right? Did you develop the way you needed to develop in the spring ball? Like, for example, whenever I was back playing, we're out there throwing routes, doing it every single day, right? I mean, we could throw the vertical route, we could throw the seam route, we could throw the out, we can do whatever. I could close my eyes and throw it, right? Because I knew where my guys were going to be because we worked so hard for so long together that it developed and showed on the field, right? The season is not where the team is made. It's right now. It's seeing how these guys have come together. If they've rallied behind each other, what does it look like? How is that? What have they done in the film room? What have they done off the field to get better as a team? But then I think with Blake coming into the season, right? He's seen that, right? He's been in the trenches with these guys for a few years now. He's got some competition now, right? So that's only going to push everybody to be better. I always joke about this, and Bryce, if you're listening, man, love you. Whenever I got into Baylor, obviously Nick was there. Nick was the guy. But once Nick left, I felt like I was better than Bryce, right? And I think as a competitor, I was listening to the interviews recently, and all of them like, hey, competition. I'm like, yeah, competition is great, but if you don't get better, then what's the point of doing it, right? So I think just pushing each other, that's really going to help the development. Hey, if they're putting in extra hours because, mentally, hey, I got somebody nipping at my heels, I need to be sure to be doing extra work. And I think that's really what the team is going to come together is, hey, being a leader, but bringing these guys, bringing them out to dinner or doing extra work after practice or doing stuff work before practice or running more routes or whatever it is, that's where the team is developed.
What was you said you guys are close, you and Bryce, and you have that time, but what was that pushing like when you obviously, he had kind of entrenched himself as the starter and you won Big 12 titles, but you're back there knowing that you feel like you can eventually overtake this spot.
Oh, we definitely had some heated battles. I mean, don't think it was always, flowers and rainbows. I mean, there was times where we probably didn't talk to each other for a couple of weeks because we were just pissed off at each other because it was like, hey, he knows he's better than me. I know I'm better than him, whatever. Right. But ultimately, right, we had to put our differences aside and just be like, hey, this is, we got to be together for the team. Right. It's not, if we all have our selfish desire and nature, but if we're able to push each other, make each other better, get off the couch, go out and do some extra work, then, that's what I was there to do, right? I wanted to be sure to be the best as much as I can. And, at the time, Bryce was the guy, right? And I didn't want to accept that selfishly, right? I don't think any competitor out there wants to be the second guy. But on the flip side, whoever they decide, whether it's Blake, whether it's Sawyer, whether it's RJ, I mean, they have to keep battling. Nobody can take a back seat to anyone because, I mean, I'm a prime example as, anything can happen during the season and you got to be the next guy up ready to take action.
You mentioned that Sawyer will probably need to, pack on a little bit more weight when all is said and done and all that. But, man, we heard so much. I mean, he must have a great personality because that was one thing that was just mentioned time and time again by all of the coaches, Aranda on down the entire staff. But he's got, some size to him, some height to him. What were any other impressions maybe you garnered just from whatever you were able to see as far as Sawyer Robertson goes?
Yeah, I think he's got some fleet of foot to him, just a little bit. He kind of when watching him run, he kind of reminds me of a guy in the NFL right now. His name's Jarrett Sic'Em. Just kind of a way that he kind of controls himself while running. Right, he's not going to break past you, but he's going to get enough yards and then get out of bounds or not take an unnecessary hit. Right, that's something I should have learned earlier than later. But I think from him, with this style of offense, I mean, looking back to where hey, we had. When Grimes was at BYU, right? He had Zach Wilson. I mean, that dude's a stud. I mean, he's an athlete. He's a stocky. He's not super tall. He really fits the system well, right? And he had Gary, right? Gary's a more stout, athletic type of build. I mean, he's able to, use his feet, right, to get extra yards. And that's what creates confusion within the defense. If you don't have a quarterback in this offense, from what I've seen, that can make plays with his feet, then it makes you one-dimensional, right? And that's I feel like we saw that a little bit last year because, I think Blake was being conservative, right? He's the guy, didn't really have a second. I know we had, Drones back there, but he's really young. I mean, they're all young, and so it's just figuring out, hey, how is Sawyer? How does he fit within the offense with his size? Can he use his feet a little bit, right? Just to extend plays, or hey, if it's a zone read, he's able to pull it, maybe get 6 or 7, potentially break a 20, 25 yarder, or not, right? I think that's what's going to help the offense long term because it's going to keep the defenses consistent to not just plowing down on the running back every single time they go to play fake or hand the ball off.
Bryce, you got him talking. Seth, I'm embarrassed now. Seth, do they have the skill players, especially on the outside now, to take that step? Because that was something that was not in Blake's control last year in that they were very raw at wide receiver all across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think they do. They got two giant tight ends that is going to be extremely critical in this offense this year. I feel like, from those guys like Baldwin and Jackson and all those guys. I mean, they're going to be able to stretch the field. I think they've developed. They should have. The coaching staff knowing who they are, they will have developed them extremely well. I saw that in their route running. Right, it was a lot crisper, more confidence. Right, getting in and out of breaks. I mean, we even saw that development from early to late. Early in the season to late in the season, where these guys are getting out of their breaks. They're running the offense extremely well. They just weren't capitalizing on some of the plays, which that comes with having a young receiving core, right? Having a young quarterback. I think they'll be able to really capitalize on those 50-50 balls, right, this year. And then as well as just keep the chains moving, not settle for field goals, and continue to put 6 points on the board every time they get the ball.
Seth Russell, the greatest Baylor quarterback of all time. And the next time we have RG3 on, I will say at least the second greatest quarterback of all time, Seth. I'll
hold you guys to it.
I will. Always great talking to you, Seth. Can't wait to see you when the season starts, if not before. But thanks for hopping on today.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me.
That's Seth Russell. Great guy.